Hello, hello. We are back again for another Wet Ink Wednesday, and I am joined on this Wet Ink Wednesday by Vladimir Bratovich. And you've been on before. You've been a writer for Never Going Home. You've
hmm
been a huge fan of Wild Skies in the past. You have, since the last time we talked, founded a security company called Golem Security.
That I
So
have.
you got a lot of stuff going on. Hello, welcome to the call.
Thank you. And I'm glad you brought me on.
Yeah. So I mean, the obviously the main thing that we're here to talk about is Never Going Home, and you went from being like a fan to a consistent game master in 2020. You had your ongoing campaign that you ran for. You were running. It was like you were running like 5 days a week, right? It was a huge effort, right?
Yeah, during the pandemic, there were so many people that were stuck in the home and they had no way to have any social interactions. So we ran a living world version of Never Going Home. So I ran for five different groups every week, and all of them missions coincided with each other and bounced off of each other. And we did this every week for almost 9.5 months.
It's incredible effort. And then you were like, "Hey, I've got some ideas," and we're like, "Well, why don't you write some?" And then
Yeah.
that is so we had a little extra mission that came out, and then
Mhm.
we're like, "We need more missions." So then we're like, "Vlad, you want to write more missions?" And you're like, "Yes, I want to write more missions." So tell us some about like I don't know, like we told you like, hey, do you want to write about America and arriving in 1918, the American Expeditionary Force, and we left it pretty open. Like you come up with the
Yes, you
story.
did.
What do you want to do along those lines? So what did you want to do, and what kind of like start at the high level, and then we'll zoom in on some stuff. But like,
Sure.
what was
The
your
overall thing I really wanted to work with was a lot of people don't really talk about World War One that much. There's not that many movies. There's not a lot of books, video games, things of that nature that really focus on the Great War. And so there's a lot of misconceptions about how long we were in the war, what happened in the war, and so forth. And I wanted to try to clarify some of those so people can see exactly what that war caused and how it really changed the shape of military matters when it comes to U.S. involvement ever since that first war.
yeah, certainly, definitely I mean there is sort of I mean there's sort of a straight line between like the Spanish American War in the 1890s through to like World War II, right? I mean, there is sort of like
Mm-hmm.
a straight line through there, but right in the middle of that is World War One. So like it is a significant step in the process of how America
Yes, it is.
interacted with the rest of the world. Um, so given that as a goal, what kind of stories did you set up? What is the kind of high level overall story that the players will play through in this 1918 dossier?
Well, I wanted to show that in the US, we were actually starting to become more open minded about things in that era than people really realize. And we broke a lot of boundaries that were unheard of in that era, from African American soldiers fighting front lines, which was never done before that, to the level that was done, to women being in combat with our radio corps. These were people that not only were not shown to be or treated as equals at home, but are now given by their own volunteering this monumental task and did so at a level that far surpassed what anybody could have believed.
Yeah, I really appreciated that you in designing this because you're the lead writer, so you said we're going to do these six missions, and they do kind of all focus on these sort of like you know almost they're almost vignette, not quite vignettes, but like they're almost like, okay, so there were these people involved, and there were these people involved, and there were these people involved, and
Mm-hmm.
just sort of spotlighting the sort of the best of America in a way, in that, or the American ideal, I guess. So tell us about some of those individuals that you wanted to spotlight,
Well, yeah.
because the some real historical figures get put in there as NPCs.
Absolutely. One of the missions I really wanted to write, but y'all had gotten it written before I even started. So the where we get the phrase "devil dog" from, I didn't get to touch. Um, but the one of the characters I really wanted to touch on was not Sergeant York that everybody knows about. I wanted to bring up Private Johnson, uh, a soldier that went so far above and beyond that if you took that battle and put it on TV, no one would ever believe it was real. It was just awe inspiring. And up until the Obama administration, most people had never even heard of him. He didn't even get the awards and accolades that were due to him from his own military until that time. The French gave him award upon award for what he did. Not so much when he got home, but his bravery was unsurpassed. And the thing that really got me about him was how humble he was. He never bragged about it. He was quoted as saying something along the lines of, you know, about all the killing he did. He said, "Well, a rabbit would do it too if he had to." He never treated it what he did as being bravado or glory. It was just, I have fought to survive, and
Yeah.
that really impressed me.
So what is the sort of, for those of us who for anyone who doesn't, haven't
Sure.
caught up, what exactly, I mean, if it gets into spoilers, I you don't have to do it, but like what did this soldier do?
Now, most uh, African American soldiers were not properly well trained. A lot of them were even given just sticks to use as rifles for training purposes, or only given manual jobs. It wasn't until the French were really like, no, here, use our equipment, go fight, did they really show what they could do. On this night, him and one other were in a foxhole on a far flung line with barely any good equipment. And this is before radios, this is before lines of communication, uh, this is before really anything of that nature. When the German offensive hit hard that one spot, his uh, battle buddy was injured very early on. He was trying to get away to get help, and he was injured again. Then this individual, instead of running, instead of giving up, because he's now one man versus an unknown number of assailants, fought and shot his ammunition to such a degree that he was able to hold off the line until he used the wrong ammunition in his rifle and jammed it.
Hmm.
So then he uses his rifle as a club, leaves the trench, and fights hand to hand until the rifle splinters. And then he pulls his knife and keeps fighting. This is after being shot, stabbed, a grenade going off on him. He took over a dozen wounds, was massively injured, but he never lost that line. And by the time that people were able to rescue him, the Germans fled. They could not beat him. And they gave him the nickname of the Black Death because of it. And it was just the sheer amount of guts and fortitude it takes to fight at that level against that many assailants and not give up even when gravely injured is just superb.
So I mean, it is a pretty incredible tale. And then we the whole project of Never Going Home is kind of like, it's two halves, right? We have explored the sort of real history side of things, but then we've got all the supernatural stuff that we've mixed in. So like, what are some of the supernatural things that you mix in, especially in this particular incident, or the other things that
Yeah.
you're dealing with?
Well, with the things that was known about American soldiers when we hit the lines, no other country understood what to do with us. We fought very ravenously. When other countries were turning back and running away, one of our commanders was actually quoted as saying, "Run hell, we just got here." The level of fighting we did, as I've told others, we didn't win World War One. We ended World War One. We were
Mm.
there for a very short amount of time, but we did a lot of chaos in that short time. Uh, and because of that, we've created whispers that will exemplify both the courage of American soldiers and the bloody ruthlessness of American soldiers, as both sides of that coin.
Yeah. Um, yeah, there's two whisper paths will be included. I believe it's rage and conviction.
Mm-hmm.
I can't recall to hand the names that we came up with them to fit in with the other
Yeah.
formats for the other whispers, but the idea of those two forces kind of like pushing the or being available to push the soldiers on is pretty interesting thing. Um, yeah, do you want to highlight any of the other parts of the adventure, like the whole path, like what is the arc of it? I think this incident with Private Johnson comes in the middle somewhere.
Yeah,
Is
what
there
we're
some
doing
other
is
moments?
sure. Some things I really want to highlight is not only that one, but instances of when the women signal operators, because again, this is long before we had true radio communication, so we still had to use switchboards. And a lot they found that men could not handle these switchboards nearly as well as civilian women could. So they had their own branch that handled this, and their ability to keep people together for morale while learning languages of multiple countries and handle all this chaos at once was phenomenal. And there is a story I mentioned that people will be able to go on where this really happened, where a headquarters was hit and caught on fire. The women had to be ordered to leave their switchboards under being arrested to leave the building, because while the building's on fire, they're refusing to leave their post, still answering it. And when they finally were allowed to go back in, they immediately fixed it themselves and went right back to work. Uh, that group of women were awe-inspiring in that aspect of just doing things that the men couldn't do.
Sure. It's yeah, it is pretty incredible. I've got a you know some of the research that I've done. I've got my book right here that I've been reading that is about all the Signal Corps,
Oh yeah.
the women of the Signal Corps, that their contributions, and it's so great to highlight. I think you were talking before about like American involvement being so sort of lesser known. I think the you if I think in the average person, obviously probably not the person who's backing Never Going Home, but like in general, somebody who thinks about American involvement, they're like, oh yeah, like the trenches and like brown uniforms and little, the hats and that's about it, but there's so many more elements to America's involvement.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I mean, I obviously like I think the explanation, at least on some level, is that just so many fewer Americans were involved than compared to the World War II effort, which happened the next
Mm-hmm.
generation. There were so many more people involved, so it makes such a bigger impact. But um yeah, it was I really like what you said earlier about like it didn't America just came in and ended the war. It didn't really win the war. And of course, we could get into. It is not in the scope of Never Going Home to assess like
Yeah.
Versailles and Wilson and whether or not the 14 points were a success or not, and all that kind of. That's beyond the scope of the game. So I kind of want to maybe I want to ask you, kind of thinking about like
Yeah.
the alternate history and the timeline and stuff like that, like what in the we've set as a sort of given for no particular reason other than that we don't necessarily want to keep going on and on forever with what would World War One have been like by 1925, if it was still being fought. That's not a
Right.
direction we want to go with the book. um So, or the series of books, I mean. So, like, we're saying it ended in 1918 at the same date that it really ended.
Mm-hmm.
Even if that doesn't make like perfect narrative sense exactly, the because you've got magic and wizards and all that kind of stuff and like monsters on the battlefield, like certainly things would have been different, but we're saying that it isn't. So like, what's your headcanon for like that gap of like what as you being invited to do the 1918 book, like what is your sort of like quote unquote reason for why the war still ends despite all of this chaos that has been unleashed?
Yeah, for me, I think it is the hardest part of writing for Never Going Home was adding the occult horror to World War One, because the level of horror that was already there was so high, it really was kind of hard to make it even worse.
Right.
And I think that a lot of soldiers during that era would have just taken to the dark nature of Never Going Home and just considered it normal. You get stuck in that mindset when you get into a combat situation that whatever is going on around you, no matter how weird, bizarre, twisted, evil, good, whatever it is, it becomes your normal. Um, it's a thing that I've really, really grasped hold of about Never Going Home, especially the losing memories as you get more powerful.
Yeah.
To me, that means that you're just going to take everything that happened when it's over, and you're gonna try to forget it. But
Right.
you've forgotten everything else. It's not who you are. So now you've got
Right.
to go home knowing about these blood magics and you know all of these others and everything else. And I think it's going to lead to a, hopefully, knock on wood, hopefully, I'd love to see the canon continue even after World War One to what happens now.
Right.
That's my hope. But the canon of it ending like that, I could see, just like I said earlier, we ended the war not wanted. Just because there's creatures out there now, they're going to still have to end it sometime. And I
Right.
think the losses would be so high. They've got to find a way to stop it somehow. So it makes sense, at least to
Yeah.
me.
No, that makes sense. So uh I think I want to ask you one more thing about Never Going Home, and then maybe we can talk
Sure.
about some other projects that you may or may not have going on. But so I think these five campaign dossiers that we've done, they're all like these six missions that take players through an adventure,
Mm-hmm.
and but we've got a lot of other missions out there that are sort of unconnected and just other little spotlight moments that aren't necessarily part of a bigger story. So, what kind of do a little mini pitch for like what you would want to do, like all fetters removed, right? And what other missions what other moments from the war might you want to explore as a writer?
Ooh.
If given that opportunity, what other little stories do you have to tell in this setting with all of its
Oh,
with
I
everything
would
right mixed
love.
together? It's got the supernatural and the other stuff.
Well, yeah. In fact, I just sent you a clip from a short film from New Zealand last night that
You
I'd love to
did.
explore, of how there's all these other um, ethnicities and groups that fought in the war that nobody really realizes. Everyone thinks of World War One being pretty much Europe,
Right.
primarily the French lines, but it was everywhere. And I would love to write more stories and see more stories being written of how it flowed throughout the entire world, of having all of these issues, all of these times, both good and bad, that people showed up and did miraculous things, and how our technology changed so much just with what happened. One of the things I'd love to write about, I'd love to write a mission for, is something that was called the death trains in World War One, because we didn't have modern hospitals, we didn't even have field hospitals back then, we didn't even have combat medics in World War One. We had runners that would just pick up the wounded toss them on a stretcher, and then try to run them back to a field hospital that really wasn't set up right. And then they would put those on a train with nurses to go back to another hospital. It's one of the reasons why we had such a high kill count was because of infections and sickness.
Sure, sure.
That idea of all of that chaos being on a train and you can't get off the train, that would be a fantastic mission to write.
I
I would have to be giddy to write that.
uh I agree. That sounds great. And that clip from that movie was that you sent me was it was, Maori soldiers doing a haka in presumably in France somewhere,
Yeah.
France or Belgium somewhere. It was and I know there was it amazed me to learn, whenever a few years ago now when I was first doing my own involvement, it was the French recruited soldiers from their colonies, and so you had Vietnamese units of soldiers who were
Mm-hmm.
in the Balkans and stuff like that, fighting the Ottoman Empire, like completely displaced from where they
Oh yeah.
quote unquote should be. It's just a fascinating mixing of things that, yeah, these stories get it does get kind of flattened down into all quiet on the Western Front, and
Yeah.
that's about it. I hear that book's a good one. I should put it on my read list, but like there's a lot more that happened. um
Mm-hmm.
all right, we've talked a bunch about World War I, Never Going Home. I love it. Thank you for having so much cool
Sure.
stuff to say. Are there any other projects that you are involved with in the nerdosphere that you want to shout out?
I wish, but no. Right now in the nerd sphere, I've been so busy with this company that especially with everything going on, that I've only been at work with Never Going Home. I'm hoping one day to get back on that uh horse and do more, especially with like John Shu and other things like that. I loved writing for them, and yeah, I'd love to get back into getting more things designed.
Sure. Well, if you do find the time, we'll definitely please consider us to pitch your game to on the first round. Um,
Definitely.
all right. Well, if anyone wants to get a hold of you, do you have a social media presences, or do you want to be gotten a hold of on the internet, or people, if you've got any of those kind of places to contact you, you can shout that out now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on under my professional name. I'm on LinkedIn's. I'm on social media. I'm on Instagram, but it's primarily only for my work in the security field. I haven't really done much on getting a social media presence for writing because I thought it was a pipe dream to ever get this far. So I need to work on that at some point.
All right. Well, hopefully nobody ever needs your services, but if they do, you're there to provide those services.
Yes,
Excellent. Again, thank you so much for your time today,
my
and
pleasure.
we'll look forward to this campaign coming to fruition and everybody getting to see your ideas put on the page.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.